and I'm going to start. Okay, so today we're talking about leasing. I'm doing this because agents are oftentimes asking me to help them with leasing. And so I've decided that I'm going to, um, and I've done this in the past, but it's been a while. So I wanted to make sure it was up to date. There's new stuff. There's always new stuff. I guess that was highlighted by Angela. I don't know. So there's a handout here, and the handout has a little bit more information than the presentation. If you click on the link to the presentation, then this is going to open up because it looks nicer. If you've lost where we started from, there's a link here that takes you back to the document. Yes, I have issues, obviously. So it's talking about leasing compliance. I probably will not have time, and I'm pretty sure I will not have time to go through a lease agreement. That would require another class. It could take a while, and some of the actual forms, but the beginning of this is for you to understand how to do this without getting sued. Now, I have not verified these statistics, but what's often quoted on the internet, and we all know that if it's quoted often on the internet, it's probably true, right? I mean, we all know that. That 50% of all litigation under the subject heading of real estate involves landlord tenant. 50%, right? At some point, I'll ask Gemini to verify that, but let's just say it's a lot. And I know it's a lot because in order to do property management, you need special errors and omissions insurance. And there are lots of free legal aid for renters, not for landlords, but for renters. And there's people that are testing often. They call on ads, they ask questions because they want you, the real estate agent, to make a mistake. And then if you, the real estate agent, makes a mistake, then they're going after you and the landlord for monetary damages. They also, by the way, can report you to the California Department of Real Estate, who takes this very seriously, and you could be disciplined by them for violating some of the rules. And the number of rules applying to agents and landlords regarding tenants grows every year. That's all. So that's the what an optimistic way to begin, right? So there's a difference between leasing and property management. This oftentimes come up. Agents will say to me, "Can we do property management at EXP?" And I say, "No, but tell me what you mean." Because there's a difference between leasing and property management. So at EXP, you can do leasing, residential or commercial. If you're a commercial, you need to have a mentor team leader that's approved for commercial transactions in California. I'm approved. But so it doesn't matter if it's residential or commercial, you could do it and get paid a commission, but we don't do property management. And what the difference is that property management is what occurs after the tenants move in, collecting the rent. Now, it gets even trickier than this because it would include hiring a handyman, having the place cleaned, anything you do to help the landlord with the tenant after the lease has been executed and the tenant has moved in is property management. Now, where this oftentimes causes issues is that the landlord says, we need somebody to come and fix
We need to order these. I was
I,
gonna order everything except for the 120s. I pulled all
would you,
these,
could you,
but there's only one of those. And then we wiped out everything.
Okay.
all right. I've muted everybody. Angela, can you mute people? No. Well, why don't you tell me that? No, anyhow. So we have to fix that next time. So tenants move in, landlord calls you up and says, "Hey, there's the toilet's broken, there's a leak. Do you have a handyman that can come and fix it? And you say, oh, yes, I do. I got a good one. And you send them over. Now they're paid by the landlord, but you've just performed property management. And if you're at eXp Realty, or for that matter, most major brokerages, you are not covered by errors and omissions insurance. If you, everything you do after the tenant moves in pushes you into the property management role, which you do not want to be in. Even a single act, calling a plumber, can create liability not covered by E&O. That's what I said. So this is licensed activity. That means the Department of Real Estate cares. It means the broker cares. It means that you have to follow the rules or you get into trouble. Now, there are some people that can work as property managers who don't have real estate licenses. They're called resident managers. And a resident manager is somebody other than the owner that lives there. And by the way, in California, if there are 16 or more units, there has to be a resident manager or the owner has to live there. They can do property management without a license. Why not? So the first, all right, so somebody says to you, I want a lease. I have a house I want to lease, a condo, a commercial building, right? That gets a little more complicated. But the first question agents ask me is, how much am I going to get paid? Right? What's the commission? Well, if it's a residential property and you're negotiating a year lease, typical commission is usually 1 month's rent. It could be 6% of the annual rent, which, by the way, is pretty close to 1 month's rent. Just saying, right? It's pretty close to it. So typically, that's what the commission is. Right? Doesn't have to be. Could be more. It could be less. And by the way, you're probably going to need to explain a value proposition as to what you're going to do that's worth 1 month's rent. Now, in California, I've done leases of residential property where it was $9,000, 1 month's rent. Nice house, right? By the way, I've got agents that have sold homes and got paid less, right, than $9,000. So it can be a decent amount of money. A lot of times we're doing it just to make a client happy, right? They're an investor. They say, hey, can you find me a tenant? So how would you know how much rent? Then they're going to say, okay, great, 1 month rent, because you've explained to them you're going to screen people, you're going to make sure they're not sued, you're going to do all of the writing of the leases and all the documents and blah, blah, blah. You're going to have pictures taken and you're going to market the property and all that other kind of stuff, which we're going to get to. And so then they say, all right, is that what they're saying now? 1 month's rent. What do you think I ought to rent it for? Now, it's not in the MLS. There aren't really easy ways of finding actual rent comparables, not really easy ways, because we assume, let's just say, that whatever the landlord said they wanted is what they got when they leased it. That's what we assume. So can that be tracked? What people in the area with similar properties that have leased them, how much rent they were charging? The answer is yes. And I used to have a subscription to Rentometer. God help me, right? And because it's one of the better programs for coming up with comparables. You can put in it's a 3-bedroom, 2-bath. You can put in basic information and it'll spit out a bunch of comparables and you can create a report and you can put your logo on it and you can print it out. Rentcast is a similar program. Some of these, by the way, have free versions of it. Some of them, if you're doing this a lot, you would probably want to sign up. Do not rely on the MLS. Very few residential rentals and almost no commercial rentals go through the MLS. So Rentometer, Rentcast, and then you may have to make what's called a habitability adjustment. And that's because there's new rules. And the new rules in California say that the rental units have to have a working stove and refrigerator. And if they don't, they're untenantable. AB 628. Now, an SRO stands for short um, dorm exemptions, SRO, short rental offerings. But it's got to have it. Now, by the way, what's I think curious is that they don't say freezer, they just say refrigerator in the code, and they don't specify how big it has to be. It doesn't say that, right? So a little tiny refrigerator probably is good enough, but you understand if the property you have does not have a working stove, and heating, by the way, is also required, that's in a different law, and it doesn't have a refrigerator, it is untenantable, and you're not supposed to rent it at all. Just saying. Then there are listing aggregators. If you go to Redfin, if you go to Zillow, if you go to apartments.com, which is owned by CoStar, and if you don't know who CoStar is, they own LoopNet. And if you don't know who LoopNet is, they're the biggest commercial database. And they're really good on like an apartment in a 20-unit multifamily. They're pretty good at that, because that's sort of their thing. Zillow and Redfin oftentimes will take a stab at what the rent ought to be on any given property. And you could look under Craigslist and Facebook. Those are sometimes you find current rentals. You would be doing all this research. And by the way, you can use artificial intelligence. If you take the address of the property and you go to Gemini and you do deep research and you say, I'm a real estate agent and I have a client that wants to rent, and you give them the address and you tell them it's a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, single family home, and here's the address, what do you think it'll rent for? It'll bang out a nice looking report. But that's one of the questions that the owner is going to want you to be able to answer is, what do you think I could rent it for? Right? Now, by the way, some of you, because I didn't actually finish this at the first question is how much you get paid. Now, you might be thinking, when do I get paid? And how do I get paid? Let's cover the most important things first, right? How much? Let's say 1 month's rent. When? When escrow closes? Man, there ain't no escrow, right? You understand this is not the sale of a house. Now, I've had big commercial rentals go through escrow because there's a lot of stuff that was being transferred and it was very complicated. But residential ones, there's no escrow. So technically, when have you earned a commission? Well, the typical lease listing agreement, the California Association of Realtors form says as soon as you've executed the lease agreement. Is that typically when we get paid? The answer is no. When do we typically get paid? When the tenant gives the landlord their security deposit, first month's rent. See, at that point, even though they've already signed the lease, but at that point, there's money that the landlord has. So then what are they going to do? Do not have them write you a check. We had a couple of years ago, one of the agents on my team just told them, write me the check. Right. And then EXP found out and it was really ugly. Right. It just got really ugly because if the landlord writes you a check and anybody finds out, i.e., the California Department of Real Estate, you're in a heap of trouble. Right. Because it violates the Business and Professions Code for a client to pay you directly. So that means that it goes to EXP. And by the way, we do enough of this. The transaction coordinator for the team knows how. We do a commission demand. And they write a check to EXP and then EXP pays you. Just saying, right? In case you were curious. So that handles the most important part. This is what we would be looking at when we're thinking of finding out what it is likely to rent for. Now, other things that you need to be familiar with is rent cap. There's a Tenant Protection Act, AB 1482, In addition to capping rent, there's something called just cause eviction, which limits how you can kick people out. Now, you'll notice at the bottom, there's a great big bar, and that is what the state rent cap maximum is. And what that says, it's 5% plus the consumer price index for that particular area. And there's a website, and they have for every area what the current CPI is. And you can take whatever that is and add 5% to it, but it cannot exceed 10%. But you'll notice Los Angeles has different rules. So does San Francisco, the county of Alameda, the city of Oakland, and Berkeley also, different rules. San Jose has their own rules. I don't have room to cover them all. So one of the things that you would need to do as a real estate agent is you would need to go to, I recommend Gemini, and you have the address of the property, and while you're asking it what it thinks the amount of rent would be, because it's going to look at all those different things that we've just talked about. Ask it, are there any local rent control laws that are going to be affected by this rental? And it'll tell you, right? So if you're in an area where there is no local rent control, you're controlled by the Tenant Protection Act. But you're supposed to know, if you're the real estate agent collecting a commission, what the rent control is. What are the exceptions? For example, on the statewide, and if you go to the CAR forms for leasing or whatever, there's a page that's about rent cap. And in it, there's a little box you can check that says you're exempt. How would you be exempt if you're a human and you're renting a single family home? Well, who would not be a human? An LLC, a trust, a corporation. So when I have potential landlords say to me, should I create an LLC? Wait a second. You just need to realize that you're not going to be exempt from the just cause eviction rules and the other rules. You're not going to be exempt. By the way, that's mostly just cause eviction. However, almost every county that I know of, every city that I know of that has their own rent control knocks out that provision. And it will say, we don't care who you are, if you're just a human being and you've only got one, you're still under our just cause eviction and rent control. You need to know that, right? And it varies significantly by city or county. So other things you just need to be aware of, AB 723, new disclosure rule, digitally altered listing images. Now you're going to put it in the MLS. Now, and you're not putting it in the MLS because you expect a real estate agent to see it, show it, and rent it. Not going to happen. You're putting it in the MLS because it syndicates. Where? Well, 300 different websites. What are the big ones? Realtor.com and Homes.com. Those are the big ones. What about Zillow? Not Zillow. Why not Zillow? Because Zillow wants you to put it in their system manually. How much does that cost? Nothing. Do I have to be the landlord? No. You can do it as an agent. Zillow wants you to use their platform. That's what they want. So it doesn't syndicate to Zillow. You got to put it in manually. So I got, by the way, out of all the websites that it automatically syndicates to, Realtor.com and Homes.com, which are like the third and fourth largest listing aggregators, you get leads. People will be replying and saying, hey, I'm interested. What are you saying? Also, by putting it in the MLS, the software you already have for making marketing materials, Bold Trail, Lofty, Brivity, those programs will make social media posts, flyers, other video walkthroughs, all that stuff automatically if it's in the MLS. and you could use EXP's enterprise Canva account to make fancy flyers and fancy stuff, and it needs it to be in the MLS. So that's why we're putting it in the MLS, right? But we're also, but so the MLS, as well as the state of California, has rules on you digitally manipulating and altering photos. There are rules. Right? You're not supposed to put in staging or things like that, or remove all the garbage or the junk without saying this is digitally altered and giving them a chance to look at the original picture. Yeah. And if you're doing that, not only are you in trouble with the multiple listing service, but the Department of Real Estate. Those guys again, right, will have an interest. You don't want to do it. Bold Trail also used to be called KV Core. What it does that is I like is that it'll make an automatic Craigslist posting. Now you need to modify it. Angela can tell me if Brivity does that, but it makes an automated Craigslist posting, but you have to look at it, because what it will do automatically is it'll put in what's called the smart number, which is not your phone number, and you'd want to change that to your phone number. If you don't want your cell phone going on Craigslist, right, then create a Google Voice number or some other number. Like if you're on the place team, you have a smart number that you could use so that it's not going, you're not giving out your cell phone number. Right. I heard this, I can't help myself, but do you know how, if you're looking to find all the sexual deviants that are in any given zip code or area, do you know how the best way to do that? It's called Craigslist Personals. But anyhow, it makes a really nice ad, and you get calls from Craigslist. Right. So that's what I like about the Bold Trail one. The leads will come in. You can use your CRM, Zillow listing manager. You're going to want to do that. And you have to advertise what the total monthly cost is going to be. No hidden fees, mandatory 2026. Have to say what the rent is and what the other fees are. It's the law. So showing, we don't usually put lock boxes because real estate agents are unlikely to be the ones that show it. We put a combo box. Is that so we can give the combination to people and they could go look themselves? No. But there are people that come to clean and people that come to paint and people that come to take photographs and all that sort of stuff. If there's an existing tenant in the property, they have to sign a lockbox, because even it's still called the lockbox, the key safe. That's what it's called. Agreement, which is a CAR form saying that they know that you're doing this. And by the way, virtually none of them will sign that. So it's always better that it's vacant, the current tenants are out, it's clean professionally, painted if need be, whatever we have to do. Then we have pictures taken and we put the combo box just to make it easier. So how then do people see it? Well, either you're going to show it to them. And my recommendation is you don't just jump in your car and drive every time somebody wants to see it. You do an open house. You say, hey, this Saturday, 10 o'clock to noon, open house. If you're interested, come and show up. And the owner sometimes will be available to open the door and let people in, right, and show the property. And then that has an advantage, and the owner gets to meet people, right? But there can be a disadvantage as well. Interrupt me if there's something that jumps out at you. All right. Tenant screening. First in line. Did I do that? Let me see. Okay. So there are certain things you can't do. You can't say in an advertisement, no Section 8. Sometimes the landlord, Section 8 is a subsidy program for low-income people to get rental properties. Generally, landlords don't like it. Is it because they're against low-income people? No, it's not really the rent, because it's a little bit safer that the county is guaranteeing like 80% of the rent, right? Because, they don't have to come up with all of it. But the biggest issue with Section 8 is that it requires that the property passed an inspection. My last rental that I did, which wasn't that long ago, it's up in the hills, the structure was built in the late 1800s. Not kidding. The heating source was a wood stove. They had a wood fireplace, and then he put in space heaters and things like that. It had a refrigerator. Now, there is no way that property would pass a Section 8 inspection. If it doesn't pass, it isn't an option for the owner to just say, well, then I guess I can't rent to you. No, that's not how it works. The owner is required to bring the property up to Section 8 standards, which in this property would practically require that it be torn down and rebuilt. Understand? Huh? So you're supposed to rent to the first qualified person. And so what that means is one of the other laws, which is somewhat of our savior, but one of the other laws says that you have to disclose what your rental criteria is: credit score and income. 2 to 3 times, 2.5, 3, credit score 650. And my recommendation is that you don't lower it too much. You keep it up there. And the reason is that you can turn somebody down because they don't have a high enough credit score. That's an objective criteria. But you can't turn them down just because of the source of the money. Does everybody understand what I'm saying? Right. And so you're supposed to, by the way, tell everyone. And if we go in Zillow Rental Manager, it asks, what is your criteria? You have to type it in. Type it in. And by the way, people that don't meet the criteria are still going to apply. That's up to you. But you understand, sometimes I've had agents that say, well, we're going to make it really, really low because we want to rent it and we don't really care. Whoa, whoa, whoa. You should care, right? Because it's going to affect how, So you get applications. You screen it against your criteria. You're supposed to offer the rental to the first qualified person that applies. So if you say, well, wait, I want to get 10, and then I'm going to, take the pick of the litter, right? The best, the nicest looking one among the 10. First of all, if you run credit checks, which you can do. CAR has a program called Rent Spree, which is a member benefit, which means it doesn't cost extra, and they have applications, and they also can run credit checks. And so typically what you do is you give the tenant a link, and the tenant applicant goes and fills out the form, and they pay for the credit check. And there's also what's called a tenant check, which, they've been evicted, and it gives a really nice report. But if you don't rent to them, you're required to refund the fees for running those reports. You're required to. So if you collect, and now, by the way, they didn't pay you or the landlord for the credit check. No. They paid the credit check company. But you and or the landlord are the ones that have to give them their money back. See the issue? So what you're supposed to do, Angela has her hand up.
Quick question. Does Section 8 supersede the other applicants in line, or
No.
do they fall in line with everyone else?
No. But let's say that's the first one. right? It's the first one. So, make sure you have a decent criteria. I'm just saying. Right. So, if you collect 10, they all do credit checks, you have to refund them. You pick one, you have to refund 9 with money that you did not receive. See the issue? That's a big issue. Now, one of the advantages of Zillow is that Zillow and there are other platforms, but Zillow is like the big one, is Zillow allows tenant applicants to pay Zillow upfront for the credit check. And then every time that tenant applies, Zillow just sends a copy of the credit check and there's no additional fee. So there's no money to refund. That's cool, right? But you're supposed to take the first qualified applicant. And that means assuming that they meet the credit score and all that. I mean, you may end up refunding one, but you're not going to refund a bunch of them. Any questions about that? All right. Okay. Section 8, tenant portion income ratios must be applied solely to the applicant's rent share, not the full contract rent. So, for example, the county is paying 80%, then the 20% that say that the tenant is responsible for is you take the rent amount, and you take the 20%, and you multiply it 3 times the income is the common one, and then they would have to prove that they have 3 times the income to meet their portion. For voucher holders, and that's a tenant 8, section 8 is a type of voucher. Offer alternative payment ability proof before requesting a credit check. So you can ask for bank statements, payment history, employment letters, other documented income sources. You can do that before you run the credit check. Remember, when you run the credit check, you have to refund it if you don't rent to them. And everything has to apply to everybody equally. Fee accounting. There is a cap on how much can be charged for a screening fee. And again, the maximum is 6202. I don't know how they came up with such a precise number, but it covers all those things. Zillow does it, and Rent Spree, there's some others, but Rent Spree, as a member of the California Association of Realtors, you already have access to it. You don't have to pay extra. And by the way, you could, or the owner could be paying the credit check, but who wants to do that? Right? But you could, then you don't have to refund anything. Now, you can, if you're going to keep money, you have to be able to prove, let's say you had them pay you, which is what I always try to avoid. And then I don't want to give them all the money back because I spent time and I have expenses, whatever. You have to prove exactly how much. If I said, give me $100 as a screening fee, and then we don't rent to them, I have to prove to them, first of all, it exceeds the maximum, but I would, even if it's $50, I'd have to prove to them where the $50 went with a reasonable value of my time or the staff time. But all of it cannot exceed $62.02. So the screening fee refund flow chart, this becomes a big issue, believe me, especially if you have a lot of tenants. The easiest way is to have the first qualified sequential processing. So the first person that's qualified, you screen them. And if they pass, you offer them the lease if they are qualified. If they are not qualified, you move on to the next one. Option B is you collect from a bunch of them, you select the best, as long as you're not using criteria that you're not supposed to, notify all the ones you didn't select, and then you're going to have to refund. And I've explained how that works. This is a big thing. Don't say no pets. Don't say it. Because what will happen is somebody will call up and say, "Hey, I'm interested in, leasing the apartment or the house. Do you accept pets?" And you say, "No." "Oh, really?" "Well, I'm blind and I have a service guide dog." No, you understand, you and the owner are about to meet lawyers. I just want you to understand that, right? You're about to meet lawyers because you're going to be sued for refusing to rent to a disabled person because of their disability. You understand? You're in a bunch of trouble. So you don't say no pets. You can have, so when people apply, you ask them, do they have any pets? What kind of pets? Now, you can charge them more rent if they have a pet. You can charge them a pet deposit if they have a pet. You can, but you can't say, don't say no pets, right? Just saying that. There's a bunch of other things you're not supposed to say. It's coming up. If it's, you could say, well, you can have service animals, that's the only pets. So assistance animals are exempt from a no pet policy. So you could say, well, if you have a actual trained service animal, I've seen some guy went on an airplane with a chicken and the chicken had one of the little vests, but you can check whether or not they're really a service animal. You could say no Great Danes, you can have some size requirements, but you have to be very careful with the no pets. Is there a comment that I need to respond to, Angela?
Nope.
All right.
I
So,
have a
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Camdy. Go ahead.
Uh, this is Gretchen. I also have a question.
um,
So, what about people who will say, "Oh, I have an emotional support animal"? Does that count the same as someone with a disability? Like, how does that?
there's a register if they have a real emotional support animal rather than they bought something on Amazon that they could put on their animal, there's actually a registration, right, where you can look it up and see if they have one. And you also have to know that on the internet you can buy the little cards that says this is a support animal, but you can actually go and check.
Okay.
And most of them are not registered. Like the chicken wasn't registered. Um, uh, so mandatory disclosure for bulk internet services. So I don't know why, but this is a thing. If you're telling everybody in an apartment building or, fourplex that there's internet and everybody has it, people can opt out. Right. And that means they don't have to pay for it. So, for example, if you say the rent is $3,000 a month and it's $25 a month for internet or whatever it is you're doing, they have a right to opt out and you can't retaliate against them because they said we don't want the internet. Statutory hazards and environmental books. Did you know that there's a bunch of environmental books and some hazards that are required to be disclosed and given to a tenant? Now, these are the books that we get people to sign receipts for, but we never really see the books. And so in a typical real estate transaction, how are all those pamphlets, the lead-based paint, the earthquake, flooding, how do all those pamphlets get communicated to a buyer? And the answer is there's links in the NHD report. Now, if you wanted to, you could go into zip forms and in the library check EPUBs, which is a sub-library, and they have copies of them there. What you would want to do if you're representing a landlord, you would tell them we need to get a modified NHD report. because the big NHD companies all have a tenant version, much cheaper, and it has links to the booklets, and it discloses some of the other things you're supposed to disclose. So the mold booklet has to be given to everyone, no exceptions. Lead-based paint, no exceptions. Proposition 65, which is an environmental hazard notice, at signing annually thereafter, if the business is 10 or more, which is usually not what we're doing. How about third-hand smoke disclosure? By the way, smoking is not a protected class. You can say no smoking. You could even say no alcohol. No, no marijuana. No, those aren't protected classes. But you can't say no pets. All right. So third-hand smoke, there's a law in California, AB 455, and it says that if anybody has ever smoked or vaped inside the unit, you have to disclose that. And the third-hand smoke is the new asbestos, the new mold, because it's in the fibers of the carpet, it's in the wall, it's there, and some people are very sensitive, and it's a toxin, and you have to tell them. And there's the RLMM is the receipt for the different books and things like that. You're supposed to have a receipt that shows you gave them the environmental books. Again, if you get a discounted NHD rental report. I use Disclosure Source myself. JCP is an old one that's been around a long time. They cost like less than $20, and that would, that would do it. They have links to the books. There's a receipt for them to sign, and you've told them other things that you're required to. So there's some contract standards. This is the second month's rent is calculated at 1/30th of a monthly rent per day. If you're because this is if you're charging 2 months rent, let's say up front. There's avoidable lease clause, and I'll do another class when I go through all the forms, including the residential lease form. There's a cap on attorney's fees. There's the third-hand smoke, which is now a material fact. Financial firewall. You don't want to do unlicensed property management even once. You don't want to be a property manager. I think I've mentioned that. AB 2801 has to do with move in and move out. So you're supposed, when they're moving in, you do a move-in and a move-in report, a move-in analysis. There's a CAR form. You take pictures of everything. If there are marks, if there's scuffs, if there are no marks and are no scuffs, you take a picture. Because what's going to happen is when they move out, you're going to do a move-out report. And what happens is that you see a scuff mark and you say, oh, you made a scuff mark on the counter, and they're going to say, no, that was there when we moved in. Well, that's why they require that you have pictures. Can everybody understand why 1 month's rent may not be enough as a commission? I don't know if anyone's starting to get that. Final handoff. Tax duties, if they are, this is one of the reasons why we don't at eXp Realty hold a trust account for collecting the rent and things like that. There's actually a withholding if the person is a foreign investor. That means they're not a U.S. citizen and they don't have the right, tax like EIN or that sort of, or TIN or social security number and all that sort of stuff, and you're maintaining a trust account, you have to withhold some of the money so you don't give it to the seller until they're proving that they're going to in fact be paying their taxes on it. If the tenant moves out and leaves abandoned property, the most you could sell it for is $700. You have to use a public auction. And yes, we have a form for that too. Here's a list of the different forms. You can see why I didn't go through all of these today. The big one, the lease listing, not too bad. There's a tenant representation instead of the BRBC, it's a TRBC. Agency disclosure, and a lot of that stuff is already built in. They have applications and screenings. I've never used the CAR forms for that. I've always used Rent Spree or Zillow's form. The rent contract would be the RLMM. The RLMM is either month to month or long term. And by the way, I'm going to throw this out. Particularly if you're not in a rent controlled area, you make the initial lease for 11 months, not 12. Why would you do that? Well, because when it hits 12, then the rent cap and just cause eviction rules, let's put it this way, just cause eviction rules, not rent cap, but just cause eviction rules take effect at 12 months. So at 11 months, if you don't like the tenant, you could say, I don't like you. I don't want you to be my tenant anymore. At 12 months, you can't do that because there's a list of 15 things that would be called a just cause eviction, 11 months. By the way, I help agents that are on my team with this. The transaction coordinator for the team knows how to fill out leases. Just saying. Now, a lot of these disclosures, the bed bugs, all that kind of stuff is all built into the bundles. They're all built in. How much more do I have? Not much. So stay in your lane, document everything. Here's some different numbers as a quick reference guide that you can, I don't know, look at. And if you're on my team and you have questions about this, reach out to me. I can help you. And you'll see if you look at the document, this is sometimes a little bit easier to read. One of the things that I have is a list of forbidden phrases, mandatory disclosures, rental criteria disclosures. I even have some examples of what FICO scores and income to rent ratios, housing voucher, refund policy. They want you to have one. And so this is a sample refund policy that you could make little check boxes, but anyhow, tenant rights disclosure, if you want to put together something, all of that is there. This would be something you would use if you're deducting from their, not giving them all their rent back, a type of log, because you may be asked to prove that you did rent it to the first person that was qualified. And that, I believe, is close as a quick checklist, more than you wanted to know. Let's hear from Badal. Is he still here? He's still here.
Yes, I am here. Thank you, Michael.
Let
me share.
Speak into the microphone a little more.
Oh, my bad.
I know you're shy.
How about now?
Yeah, better. All right.
All right. So, great. Can you see my screen?
Yes, DSCR.
Yeah. So the idea to learn about leasing from Michael, very important topic. To learn about DSCR, to how can you help your client to buy more investment property, right? So one side you leasing their property, and one side help them to buy more property. How can your client buy more property to understand a loan that helps you, to helps you and your client. So DSCR loan program, great program, the great non-QM program, non-qualified mortgage program for investors. Okay, so whoever is having investment properties, either residential, mixed use, or commercial, or everywhere DSCR loan works. What is the DSCR means? Debt service coverage ratio. You don't have to learn it. In simple language, It's based on property's cash flow, based on rental income, doesn't require borrower's income to qualify. So no W-2 requirement, no tax return, no property, uh, any other form of bank statement or anything required to qualify for DSCR loans. Just one thing required is rental income. Whether rental income has it's above your expense, you are qualified, right? So that's what DSCR loan is. It's focused on investors only. So your client cannot live in that property, or your client's relatives or friends or family cannot live in that property, because you cannot, sometimes you cannot ask rent, or you enforce the rent to family. So only requirement, is more than expense rental income is more than expense, and investor focus, so no friends and family lives in property. So simple formula how you calculate DSCR ratio. So there is it is a ratio of your monthly income and monthly expense. We want to keep that ratio above 1, means your rental income divided by your whole expense, PITIA, which is principal, interest, tax, insurance, and HOA, if should be more than 1. So let's have a simple example. Your rent is $3,000, your principal and interest is mortgage is $2,000, $100 tax, and some additional fees. Your total expense is $2,250, means your D 3,000 divided by 20 to 50 is 1.33, means DSCR you qualify for that loan. Let's take an example. You or your client purchasing $500,000 property. There is a different discussion where you're gonna find $500,000 property, but let's assume that there is a purchase value is 500,000. Down payment is 15%, 75K. Loan amount almost 400K plus or minus, and you getting 330-year loan. Okay, there's some calculation mismatch, but don't ignore that. Your rent is $4,000, so based on 7%, something 3,000 plus or minus your PITI, tax, insurance is 3,600. So now 4,000 income, rental income, and your expense is 3,600. Overall, your ratio is 1.1. So that qualifies for DSCR loan. We don't ask for any W-2s returns. What is a FICO requirement? Because it's an investment loan, there's a different requirement for the FICO, like credit score, compared to conventional loan, and the down payment requirement. So if your score is better than 720, you will be qualified for 15% down payment. So within 15% down payment, we figure out the rent. How we figure out the rent, it's in the next slide. If your score is like 660 and above, under 720, programs allows 25% down payment. Commercial properties require like 25% and up down payment, and mixed use require 65% and up down payment. How that will work, like how you will ask me, Badal, how you find the rent, right? So there is an appraisal called 1007, which is a rent to figure out rent schedule, whether it is short-term rent or long-term rent. Long-term rent is like 12 month or above. Short-term length is Airbnb and other kind of rent. So there are two different kind of rent schedules. So we find the rent using 1007. That's number one during the process. The number one requirement during the loan process. Second requirement is reserve. This program required 3 to 9 month. Some better programs require 6 to 9 month. There are some programs allow 3 to 9 month reserve requirement, means you should have like a mortgage worth 3 month to 6 month in your saving account or checking account or in your stocks or in your crypto, to just to prove that you have money in case you don't find the tenant. First time investor means someone have a house, someone has a property primary residence, and now they wants to buy the first investment property. You will be qualified using 25% down payment. I have a program has some little strict requirement of first time home buyer. So there's a different first time investor and first time home buyer. First time investor, we are expecting having a primary house or a property, but first time home buyer, they don't have anything. They last 3 years they don't own any property. They also qualify for that the different program, but there is a opportunity available for them also. There is a short-term rental short-term rental properties also count, like if you buying a property for Airbnb or Verbo or anything something similar to that, requirement is like 30% down payment, and you can have you can own the house. And short-term rental usually have a better rental income than, so if property is in good area, then definitely is a good opportunity. Quick difference between conventional and DSCR. The conventional loan require W2 tax return, pay stubs, prove we have to prove income, last 2 year of tax using last 2 year of income details and tax returns. This is a little slower process on conventional. DSCR is little, if we are closing conventional loan like in 3 weeks, DSCR can be closed in like 2 weeks. 30-year to 40-year programs available, means we can have a loan for 30-year or 40-year, depend on the programs, but there's some opportunity available for 40-year. You will ask me why you want to go 40-year. Sometimes you don't have a DSCR ratio 1 and above, and you want to, some programs allows to go calculate based on 40-year and have a loan for 40-year, and then your expense goes little down and you able to manage the DSCR ratio. So there are some options available. Okay, if you want to know more, if you have a client they like to buy investment property, reach out to me. I am happy to help, happy to give you some consultation. Any question? Back to Michael.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Yeah.
Hey, Mike, there's
Oh.
some questions in the chat. There's like 3 questions in the chat.
All right. What are they? Let me find them. Is there a
Yes.
limit on pet deposit? No. There's a limit on anything that is collected other than the first month's rent in advance falls under the security deposit regulations. It doesn't matter what you call them. You can call it a pet deposit, a key deposit, a cleaning deposit, a deposit deposit. If it's something you're collecting in advance other than the first month's rent, it's regulated by the maximum amount of the security deposit, which varies if it's furnished or unfurnished and whether or not the owner is somebody that has multiple properties. Will there be PMI? That's a question not for me, but for somebody else.
So yeah, so yes, if down payment is less than 20%, there will be PMI for DSCR loans.
All right. So there is also a question about what is the limit on security deposit. If it's the standard cap is 1 month's rent, that means in addition to the first month's rent. If it's there's no longer a distinction between furnished and unfurnished anymore. It's just 1 month's rent. It's all inclusive, the 1 month's rent. That includes pet deposits, cleaning deposits, last month's rent, everything other than the first month's rent. It's 1 month. If you're a small landlord, however, under, I think, 5 feet tall, I think that's kind of where they draw the line, or maybe not. A small landlord is somebody who is a natural person or an LLC owned only by natural people, and they don't own more than 2 residential rental properties. But of course, after hearing from but all you might want to have them buy some more. then they can charge 2 months rent, right? If they're a human being and not a big corporation, and if they don't own more than 4 total units. In other words, they have fourplex, but that's all that they have. And service members have a different exception for the security deposit. You know, it gets complicated after that. There's more rules depending upon who they are, but those are the typical ones. Most people, it's 1 month's rent. If you're small, only own 4. Now, a lot of times that means renting a single family home qualifies. 2 months rent. Security deposit. Any other questions? All right. This is your chance. All right. Sounds great then. Thank you everybody for coming. Later I'll do a class on how to fill out the lease agreement if you guys are still curious, or maybe you've decided you don't want to have anything to do with this ever again. I would understand. Have a great day, everyone. Stay dry.